Hey, George.
How you doing, Adam?
I'm doing all right. You know, we've heard a lot of people over many years now that have been talking about the death of Agile. And recently, we were discussing this and we wrote a blog post on it, and we've gotten some really interesting reactions. So I thought it'd be good for us to chat about what we mean by the death of Agile and the rise of adaptability, and what people mean when they say, is Agile dead? We've been talking a little bit about, is the concept dead? Is the methodology dead? Is there a framework dead? What do people mean when they say Agile is dead?
Uh, well, I don't know what everyone means, but what I mean, I actually don't say it is because to me, it's an instance of throwing baby out with the bathwater. People have been using that term to sensationalize and get attention, and I think that's valuable to some degree. What I really think it means is that Agile as an end, Agile processes, Agile methods, even Agile principles as an end, as the thing that we aspire to be. What I think it really means is that Agile as the goal or Agile as the end in itself, people are and companies are realizing that that isn't what it should be. When everything's all about Agile and we approach change and developing greater capability by introducing things like Agile methods, we lose sight of we lose sight of our real goals as a business, and everything becomes about the process, and that winds up going down paths that diverge from success. And the other is that we don't recognize that Agile, in order to be effective, teams that are Agile need an environment that's different than exists in the organization, whether that environment is other processes that get in the way that conflict with it, or it's old school management that hasn't
Yeah.
evolved, or then the list goes, cultural things that are misaligned. All of those things wind up making Agile less and less effective, resulting in folks making big decisions like, let's fire all the Agile people and coaches and product owners and all
Yes.
that stuff.
One thing you're talking about is going back to the true intent of Agile and how that got misinterpreted or maybe misapplied, right? So, what you've said first is that we've been talking about Agile as an end to itself. Are you Agile?
Mm-hmm.
How Agile are you? What's the level of agility? When the intent was always, how well do we work together? How well do we make decisions and change? How well do we collaborate and then try to move with the whole organization? So it wasn't really just about a methodology. Do you do this, then this, then this? It was more of, how do we work better together so there's less misunderstanding between us? So I think that that's one point.
I agree. I think the how took over for the why and what. So the people have been saying for a long time, the ones who really know about what it's like to succeed with agility have been saying, hey, it's about the principles. It's not about these process and methods. And they're right. It's also about the process and methods. But what's most important is, like you said, we are collaborating together. We're learning from what we see in the world with our customers and with our teams. And we're doing something about that to constantly change and constantly improve. Thus, the adaptivity concept.
Right. So the first idea of the death of Agile, the death of Agile as an end unto itself, as its own separate methodology in the organization. The intent was that everyone experiences agility. And that's why we're saying, what was the intent? To be adaptable, to learn from change, always try to improve over time. And so it's really that people got wrapped up into measuring how agile you were as a maturity metric, or how much of the organization we've trained in agility, and it got away from actually living
Mm-hmm.
that. And I mean living it in the sense of, things are going to change all of the time, and we have to be prepared and assume, by the way, that it's going to change, and be prepared to do something quickly, not take a long time to figure out what to do. And now the needs of the organization have changed. The actual way we applied it really didn't. And so that was been a struggle. It's still a little bit of a struggle.
That's a great point too. It gets to the when we're married to the motions of Agile, the means, the how, the steps and the story points and the ceremonies and these things, then we get blinded by those because in different contexts and at different times, Agile might look a little bit different. Being Agile looks different on a software product development team than it does in an operations group, for example.
That's right.
And in the latter, they might not even do Scrum or anything that looks like it. But would they be constantly looking at dealing with change rapidly? Absolutely. Would they be doing things like iterating and automating more and all these things? Absolutely. The same is true in any business function. When we apply the method wrongly, it doesn't go so well, and then the method gets a bad name. So we need to be more thoughtful in the future about where that goes.
So another point that we've seen more recently is that although the original intent was always to have our business as a full partner in the process, we didn't always have that. And frankly, we still don't always do it really well either. So there's been a more recent focus on how do we get product management involved and how the business has to be directly involved. The intent of Agile was to really bring business and technology together because of miscommunication and misalignment. And then it kind of separated as Agile started focusing more on delivery and technology than it did about business for whatever reason. Maybe because it sounded like a technical thing, maybe because it was originated by people that were actually writing the code more than the business side, whatever that reason is.
I
But
actually think that reason is the most important thing in this entire conversation. The reason why, a major reason why, in many cases, agility kind of receded and focused on engineering or product development and teams building products, in particular software products, and didn't go further was because of not being willing to change in those other areas,
right,
and not knowing how to some degree. Great example, when you introduce any of the agile methods to product development teams, what are all the minimum managers doing who aren't part of those teams? They're usually left by the wayside. What are the other functions in the organization, HR and marketing and ops and infrastructure and these other things? What are we doing there to help them understand what these teams are doing now and perhaps even learn and themselves become more adaptive? That's, again, back to why we're using
really
that term.
I think two things happened. Those people felt left out. They did, and then we didn't have a good way of bringing them in. It's also the result of the way we structure our organizations. We still have a very matrix organizations. They're very hierarchical. They weren't designed for the type of communication and collaboration that a true adaptable organization needs. We've siloed ourselves into these areas that are very protective of what they do. And true adaptability means we all do what we can to move forward towards the goal. And that might mean we do things a little differently, or we do things in different ways that we've traditionally not done. And that's tough for people.
So we're looking at org design. I think you bring up a really important set of points. We're looking at org design differently now. Another problem is that org design and org change hasn't changed a whole lot and needs to. So we're looking at that stuff a lot differently now. On the theme of baby and bathwater, I wouldn't throw out matrix organization or hierarchies completely because, they're horrible and they're slow. Sure, they're slow, there's bureaucracy, but instead challenging how we are organizing people from an org chart perspective versus how they operate,
right,
and scrutinizing that a little bit more. In a several 100,000 person company, which is not uncommon for us to be working in, and somewhere there's going to be hierarchical elements. The problem is where those hierarchies wind up being the communication chains all the way up, all the way down, and separating the orgs, the silos. So we've been doing a lot of work with how do you get the benefits in the right ways of those kinds of structures for some things, like learning about common best practices, but without getting in the way of teams and without preventing teams and others from learning from each other. So it needs a little bit of both. It just can't all be given to the org chart. Our fascination and focus on the org chart being also how we operate, I think, is really the big problem there.
That's right. People have to understand that the org chart doesn't mean you can't talk to the person next to you if they're in a different part of the org.
In some companies it does.
Well, it does, and it shouldn't. But also that we also have seen that in teams. Even agile teams feel sometimes that they can't talk to other teams because of that culture of don't communicate back and forth or don't talk to those people. So that's really interesting because it becomes then two things. One instance is the fact that many things could be true. Some parts of our system could be moving at a different speed than other parts of our system. And the way we think of work right now is very linear. You do A, then you do B, then you do C. But in the real world, and many things might have to go on at the same time. And we always think of just left and right or north and south, but there's up and down, right? And so they're not just a car would be a linear car chase, but a submarine can go up and down. And so that's the kind of same thing with the work we do. It doesn't just go left and right or back and forth. It can go up or down or, in or out or
And
whatever.
this, what you're saying now gets to a really, I don't like the anti command and control, inherently command and control is bad kind of arguments. I think they really miss a whole lot of the reason why sometimes more of a command and control kind of management coordination or can be problematic. They can also be beneficial in different ways. One reason why what you said is super important, and I hope people start learning from this, is that the situations you're describing, they're really complex. They've actually always been really complex. They've gotten more so because of technology and other things. But because of that, having teams that can function on their own and that can make decisions based on things as they're changing will allow for far greater, again, adaptability and results. And I do believe it was what was intended by Agile methods, and many of those thought leaders and experts who've been doing this stuff like we have for a long time will say that. It
Yeah.
hasn't happened though, because again, that marriage and that over focus on the tools and the process, ironically, which is on the other side of that manifesto they wrote, are the focus, and the other things have not changed. We haven't valued the ability for teams to make decisions and to be able to learn. Instead, that the like you said, the fascination with the hierarchy and managers deciding things, that hasn't changed. So I believe that management topic is huge.
Yeah.
I want to say one other thing, which is that you've been using the word intent. And I believe that one of the problems is that the intent of those actually introducing this stuff has not been as much as it should have the things we're talking about. It should have been the need all the time from the beginning of the Agile days and Scrum in the 90s and XP in the early 2000s, et cetera, has been that kind of adaptability, being able to deal with change and
Yeah.
satisfy the customer all the time. But that's been the need, and that was the intent of the people who came up with it, and maybe the early folks. But that intent hasn't been shared by all of management and all of our organizations. It's kind of been lost along the way for the focus on the process. The need is still the same. In fact, it's worse now. It's more significant
And
now. And unfortunately, because we haven't done the things we're talking about, we see instances of Agile where it's not working so well. And we think that's because of the method. We think it's because of those product owners and Scrum Masters. So we wind up getting rid of a bunch of those people.
what we're saying is that every part of your organization has to be able to adapt to change. And if we're all aligned in the organization to achieving our objectives, whatever those are, then each part of the org has to be adaptable in its own way. Each part doesn't have to be the same type of adaptable, nor does it have to be at the same level of adaptable. What we mean by adaptability is that your entire organization is able to work together in a way to move us forward towards our goals. So for instance, if it's HR, adaptable doesn't mean HR changes the way they do things every day. It means that they are able to support the type of things we need HR to support: learning paths, job descriptions, training, things like that, that might change often, right? Because maybe a few years ago we trained in one type of methodology or in one way, where now we're seeing there's more focus on maybe product management and other types of capabilities that we weren't really training people in or weren't getting people ready for in the org. If you're finance org doesn't have to be agile, but we have to be able to adapt to fund things differently, maybe more frequently or in a different manner. Maybe we fund teams and not projects. So that's another part of it, is that when we're talking about adaptability, we're talking about the whole org, but everyone doesn't have to be doing the same thing. We just have to be all working towards the same goal, and each part of the org is actually contributing what they contribute in that way.
I think shared goals are a huge part, and shared objectives, and like that, those are a huge missing element of where we've seen stuff not go so well. I actually want to warn against using the term, any term, as just a replacement and saying, oh, Agile is the thing, now it's adaptability. I actually don't think that's the case. I think Agile, like I said before, is not dead. It's needed in certain contexts. Where it is, we should strive to do really well at it and embrace it for what capabilities we need. We need the ability to learn. We need the ability to pivot. We need the ability to build product and get customer feedback, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So that needs to be preserved. Adaptability as well. I want to be careful and make sure we're not moving from one buzzword and trading it for another one. Adaptability is not the goal either. The company's goals of success might be different.
That's
Adaptability
right.
might be a necessary capability. And in that, we should always aspire to be getting better at that so that at any time we're figuring out the right things we need to do in every part of the organization in order to advance those kind of shared goals.
Well, what we talk about is the fact that, and I love what you said, so I want to reiterate it. The goal is always in any organization, any business, to deliver value to their customer so that they can run their business. So the agility or the adaptability is just means to delivering our products and services, and that's what we're really doing. And very often when we're stuck in a siloed organization with a process that we've been good at in the past, with a product that we've been successful in the past with, we don't always look outside of ourselves or see the looming danger on the horizon because we're not focusing on those things.
That's the one I'm most interested in because it's the one we have the most control over. Why is it that our organizations right now need to change in order to be the way we need to be? If we have an innovation that we learn about, how can we capitalize on it? Well, the internal pressures from your existing products might create a whole lot of political power for them and desire to squash those technologies. I'm making that example up. There are countless examples of this sort of thing
Sure.
where the current organization actually prevents it. So again, Agile's fine. Agile's good stuff for software product development in particular and other kinds of product development where there's teams building stuff. And there are other great paradigms too that have also gone by the wayside more or less, like Lean and Six Sigma. They're
Sure.
still around because they're sound, but there were heydays for each of these things. TQM, if you're going back, and I'm an operations management person, so the list goes on, happens over and over again. They've all experienced this and they're all sound in their own ways. The key is to understand where they're useful, use them where they're useful, and make sure the missing piece is let's take a look at our organization right now, every aspect of it and how it does or doesn't allow us to succeed in these ways. And that's
Sure.
the piece that people are missing.
So you're saying that in organizations, we should be open to whatever way helps us get to the next step as quickly and as effectively as possible, that helps us towards the goal we're trying to achieve, which is to deliver our products and services to our customers that are delighting them, right? That's really the essence here, and that there might be multiple methodology components, but it's always, is this the best way that we can do this, the most efficient, the most effective, the safest, the most secure, whatever that is, because different organizations have different needs, but every organization isn't going to be doing exactly the same thing.
Not the same way. Certainly not the same thing, certainly not the same way. Now, is it going to be completely chaotic? No, and I want to warn against that too. When you say, oh, we should just do whatever we need, then people who don't have the knowledge or experience with the things that work wind up doing whatever. And we see that in a lot of places too. In fact, we see now quite a few companies where they've regressed. They've said, oh,
Yeah,
the Agile stuff isn't working. Let's throw out the product owners or the scrum masters or whatever. But they don't go back in and say, what is it we do now?
right.
So they wind up with a way worse Frankenstein monster of Agile-like stuff with some semblance of the motions of agility, but they don't get the benefits from it at all. And they also don't get benefits of the old kind of more deterministic waterfall, whatever you want to call it, way,
Right.
because they're not doing that either. So
That's right.
big problem. So before you jumping into this thing, I hope people take that as an opportunity to pause and say, are we throwing out the baby with the bathwater in this
Right.
thing? What didn't work? Let's learn from that, because that's a huge source of learning too. Let's say you do want to make a major change like that, and Agile is dead for your company. If you're not at least getting the learnings of why it didn't succeed, you are throwing out a huge amount of value and just going to repeat the process over and over again.
I actually call when people combine those methodologies, but they don't do any of them, some hybrid horror, because what they've done
Yeah.
is you're not doing waterfall, you're not doing agile, you're just making things up or combining them, and then you get nothing. It actually is worse than doing either one of
Yeah.
them halfway
I think,
decently.
the natural state of agility in any big company is going to be hybrid to some degree, but there's
That's right.
hybrid that is purposeful and is beneficial and benefits from it and doesn't lose the essence of each of those kind of systems. And then there's this ad hoc process, which winds up being about appeasing people, what's easiest to do because people are willing to do it. And
Right.
that becomes the horror you're talking about, because whatever is people are willing to sign on to is easier for these people, is wound to be wound up usually winds up to be a big hodgepodge and nightmare.
I think the biggest impact that we see or that we could try to make, and we should talk about this, is leadership and management, because
100%.
no organization changes anything they do unless leadership supports it. And even more importantly than supporting it, they play by the same rules. Because what we see a
Mm-hmm.
lot of is that we say we're doing a process, whether it's agile or waterfall, and then the people doing the work are following the process. But the people making the decisions on what to work on are not quite following the process. Everyone wants what they want, regardless of our capacity, regardless of our objective. And then what we get into is a fight for the capacity and capability we have, and we overburden people, we overtax the whole system, and then people start blaming the methodology for the failure, and not the fact that
Mm-hmm.
we haven't led our people through example into this new way of doing things.
And you know what? I've heard of countless stories where those people blaming are kind of right. Like I hear the story of, if we want to go specifically into Agile for a moment, the Scrum Master and product owner were a team of two people. Sounds a little curious to me. So when we find out we're spending all that money and all those dedicated management roles for the work of two people, we probably haven't thought about how we're organized or what we're doing. When you compound those stories, it creates a terrible story about agility, and there are plenty of others. So you were talking about management and leadership. I believe it's the biggest thing. There are folks who've been talking about this and screaming about it and writing about it, like Gary Hamel, for 30 years or more, that management innovation hasn't occurred, or the middle management and how we do it hasn't really dramatically changed. I think that's the biggest culprit, and also the only way out of this. These are the folks who are running the organization.
Right?
We've taught people to run our teams, and we taught our teams to operate differently. And we've
Yes.
taught product owners and other roles like that how to run and drive the teams and to direct the teams differently. But all of these folks who are running the inner workings of the organization around it have not changed at all. So it simply doesn't fit.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think that what we've been trying to do is really get people focused on their objectives, really understand how they're going to measure things, understand what we're all trying to achieve at this moment, to
Mm-hmm.
help people prioritize things out. That doesn't mean we won't do this ever. We very much want to say we're not going to do that now because currently it doesn't align with the outcome we're trying to achieve. So that's one part. And the other part is incentivizing people for the right things. Very often we see the pattern of our executive leadership talks agile, even if they don't fully understand it. Our management is told to do agile, but they're incented to do something else. They're incented to
Mm-hmm.
drive output versus outcomes. We're still thinking of managers as managing a factory, basically, get as much out of the system as you can. And so we have the people that are doing the actual work trying to be agile. And we have the people at the top talking
So
about agile. We have people in the middle saying, "You, I want to be agile, but I'm not. That's not what I'm being incented to do."
I want to actually talk about this one a little bit on the baby with the bathwater theme again. It sounds like another example of it. Uh, I don't see why managers shouldn't aspire to get the most out of the organization or their teams. If it's most value, fine. Let's pretend it's
Right.
most value. The problem is their way of doing that is wrong. It just doesn't work. The multitasking, the piling on lots of things, the not allowing people to focus, the not having shared objectives, the how in their even if everyone agrees that this kind of factory mindset exists, their approach to doing it is wrong. It doesn't work. And that's thus the kind of more agile styles of management, the more adaptive kinds of management are needed, because we've learned time and time again in not just complex things like software development and design, but also in kind of even in things like manufacturing, it's been proven over and over again that running machines at 100% capacity causes problems, and it causes bottlenecks and other things. And focusing on constraints is how you optimize more value out of the whole, or throughput out of the whole thing. And
Right.
that stuff hasn't made its way into our management culture. Old school. It's not just about agile either. And it's some of these things have been around for decades and simply not made it into how we manage
I would like if you could talk to folks that are watching what we think they could do and what our point of view is on how they can move forward out of this conundrum they're in. But maybe people don't understand our point of view.
And it kind of aligns with what we're doing for work all the time now, which is things like shrinking the change and being a little bit more thoughtful, pumping the brakes a little bit before making a rash decision like Agile is dead or Lean is dead or design thinking is dead, when any of these things and throwing that out. And stop for a moment. You mentioned shared goals. Well, what is success for us?
Right.
Is that aligned? If that's not true, that it's aligned across the groups that are working or the teams or whatever, let's start with that one. And then also say, all right, what is going to help us next at becoming successful? Some of that might be dealing with change. Some of that might be figuring out what is the next thing or set of things that are going to help us become more capable. The part I skipped was, let's talk about, do we agree that adaptability is something that's going to be necessary? If so, what are we introducing to improve that? A team's adaptability, an org's adaptability, the companies, and focus on that a little bit more. And in so doing, we might be identifying, hey, you know what? Better Agile on these teams actually might help us there. Or, you know what? We need to help these middle managers learn a different way, learn how to enable self-organizing teams, which most middle managers aren't able to do at all. It's not so straightforward. It's not so easy.
Right.
You can't read a book. Well, you can read books on the topic, but it's hard to do without experience and without knowing some of the things that we do.
And then it comes right back to leadership, right? That leadership has to not just support it, they have to live it, they have to act this, because this is the part that we see. I think the most dissonance is everyone agrees they want to achieve an outcome, but not everyone wants to play by the same rules or follow the same method or sacrifice something they want for something that is a greater good for the whole company or the greater outcome.
Yeah, and I do change and influence work all the time. And one conclusion I've come to, well, as close to a conclusion as I can make, is that I haven't found a single instance of someone who really didn't want to change or get better. So I think that's a myth. People don't want to change. They're uncomfortable by it, and they perhaps, like you said, will lose something, or there's something about the organization or its culture or their perception of leaders that makes it unappealing to do that. But those are the things that get in the way. So what do we now work? How do we work on those things? I think that's part of the work of the future.
Yeah, so what we're saying is Agile isn't dead, although it's a great way to get people to pay attention. But the true sense of Agile and the true sense of enabling adaptability in the organization is as important as ever, maybe more important now as things become faster and more complex. But the way we've applied Agile in the past hasn't been as successful as we would have liked. And now we're at an inflection point where we can help people into the next phase of agility and get more success out of it from what we've learned over the last many years.
Yeah, I agree. And said more bluntly, in my opinion, agility started as software developers rebelling against kind of bureaucracy and other things in order to develop better products for customers. And over time, all of these other things were added to that, many of them because of that same intent. You mentioned groups coming to the table, like UX and design thinking and other things coming to the table, product management, with that intent. I believe the main population of folks who have not come to the table are management in general. And I think managers and leaders in general have dropped the ball here. They haven't gotten involved. They've assumed that teams learning about Scrum are going to result in successful product development and more throughput. That microscope was not generally pointed inward at themselves and how they manage and how they lead. Ironically, these are the people who are getting rid of it. So
That's right.
You could interpret that however you want to.
Well, let's leave that there for today. I think this is really interesting for folks. I'm sure we have a lot more to talk about, especially in regard to leadership. So let's promise the folks that we're going to write and speak more about that. Hey, thanks for your time today, George.
Thank you, Adam.